question here from Tekel. Is the Microsoft Office 365 suite going to be available pro bono to the unmentioned countries in the region as well? I guess this covers the countries which you hadn't mentioned in your presentation.
Answer now, right away?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, the Microsoft Office 365 is available pro bono to all the countries, and they can use the Teams as well. So yes, it's available throughout. They are coming in all countries in the Eastern Africa region.
All right, thank you. Adam, this one's for you. This is from Maxwell. What better journey in education takes place 100% all over the internet?
I think one of the things we've noticed is this kind of broad variety of teaching options from a technology perspective. From pure video discussion to the use of shared or interactive document editing or whiteboards, through to the use of tests and polls, side breakout rooms and all kinds of aspects. So there's certainly that side. The second thing is, I think, from the teaching perspective, how do the teachers just give a lecture? Do they actually use the online bit more for answering student questions? And it's more one-to-one or one-to-small groups, or is it more actually for like activities where you set off an activity, you let the kids do something in their books or on a website or online or something, and then you come back after 15-20 minutes and discuss? So there's a whole range of aspects to pedagogy around online learning. So I don't think there's any common agreement or common definition, and it really depends on the age of the kids, the subject they're studying, the teacher's style, the technology that's available, and so on. I hope that's helpful.
This is from Samuel. How do we practically and holistically reconcile the time lost, the lopsided online access among pupils and students during the COVID-19 and the post-COVID, when it would be apparently assumed as being on the same page?
This is a very important question, but I think currently governments are grappling with this kind of issues, how to catch up on lost time, lost learning, and so on, how to deal with examinations, that some years to do examinations to move on to the next level or to universities and so on. So how do we sort this out? How do we get back, if you like, recover lost learning, and so on and so on. So this is still being grappled with by governments and partners, and definitely the development community are still struggling with this. I think for a start, those countries that say they want to, encouraging countries to reopen schools, when those countries that decide to do so, we give the guidelines are provided, and these are guidelines provided either jointly or by UNESCO has definitely issued these guidelines to the governments to all the countries under the region, the Ministry of Education, as well as the guidelines that were jointly endorsed and signed off on by UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, I think, have also by guidelines for opening school. So, but essentially, this is an issue we are grappling with at the moment, Samuel, and I hope that we could deal with this very quickly. Thank you.
I may also add one point. I think some countries have been looking at how to do summer schools or weekend classes or evening classes to help catch up in smaller groups offline, obviously, because those who have been online have been missing out on that. So that's something that may need to be explored. I know it's tricky with the Teachers Union, TSC, and other aspects around this, but that's something that's very important.
Michael, I'd like to add on something there. I don't think in some cases people will ever catch up. And the reason is because if you look at the spectrum between those who have access to education and those who don't have access to online education, there's a very big disconnect. And so the ability to reach the lowest common denominator is going to be something of a very big challenge, just like Jalo has just said. But having said that, I think there's a need. Adam had mentioned these trucks that were moving all over the place, and because of COVID, they have stopped. I think there's going to be a need to be able to give access even during the COVID times in order to allow for the lowest common denominator, those who do not have access, to have access to education.
So there's a question from Steve here that is directed to Adam. So how do you ensure knowledge retention once the DigiTrack leaves site and the students have no longer have access to the online material?
Great question. And actually, I was just talking to the team yesterday about it and how we are planning, though it's not confirmed yet, to work with a local NGO partner who has an app that can provide mentoring for the youth. So even after the trucks move to another place, the youth can use the app to get support remotely. And that's something that we're looking at doing. Of course, you can use WhatsApp and Facebook groups and other things as well. So we're also trying to promote those to the students. We are also working with the Blaze Link, which is a kind of a software product of Safaricom. Also has some aspect of platform and support as well. But it's very, very important. I think the biggest mistake most people make, most organizations make, is you train and then you leave. And training has to have support and ongoing continuation. Right. Good question. Right.
Okay, so I'd like to just throw this question out to all three of you. Anyone is welcome to take it. So what happens now that we've had this pause because of the pandemic, and there has been always this talk about reforming education, structuring education for the purpose of the fourth industrial revolution and all that. So there's probably an opportunity that has been created, although there is the downside of the current curriculum is not being covered. So what other opportunities do you see that we've been brought for through this pandemic?
Opportunities brought about by the pandemic. Normally, we are trained or coached to look at every challenge as an opportunity. That's a good question. Certainly, the pandemic caught the education system and education practitioners, teachers, school administrators, learners, those at the Ministry of Education, for example. The whole system was caught unprepared to handle this kind of virus, to continue education in this context. So that has brought out the weaknesses in the system and what needs to be addressed among to solve the situation or is the problem. And online learning is an opportunity which can be elaborated, which can be expanded, and costs would be involved, obviously, where you have to expand networks or internet infrastructures. But governments, just like other development partners, would just have to see how they would support governments to expand their infrastructure. That's an opportunity that is there. Teachers, on the other hand, on the other side, teachers who were scared of touching even a laptop, the keyboard, because they fear it will break. And believe me, I've seen this in other parts of Africa. I don't want to name the country, but where we are looking at supporting teaching institutions to use IT to improve quality education, access to resources on the internet to teach and so on. So these teachers in this pandemic and beyond the pandemic, they would have been trained, their capacities have been built on using teaching and learning, using these platforms, online platforms, be it from wherever, Microsoft, Huawei, wherever, can use it. They'll be trained to use it to teach and assess. And when this is an added value to them, it increases their value as teachers and enables them to continue teaching during and even after the pandemic. So the other opportunity is the pandemic has brought about a coalition of partners. Huawei is one of them. Microsoft is another. The coalition for education. The other coalition that was launched also recently was the Global Business Coalition, which includes KPMG and a few others who are also supporting, seeing how they support. So let me just stop here on the opportunities that this pandemic has brought about. If we leverage on these partnerships, these global partnerships, for example, for education, beyond even the COVID, it would be very, very useful in moving the quality of education, access and quality of education, and indeed equity. Equity is very important in the next 10 years before the end of this global development agenda of the 2030. We have just 10 more years to go. Over to you, Michael.
I wanted to add, Michael, about the opportunities. I see, in addition to what Jallo has said, there are two other additions that I'd like to add. And the first is in the health and wellness space. How to think about the psychology of the learners. For the most part, everybody thinks about the parents, thinks about the teachers, but rarely do we put the child at the center of this whole situation. So I think there's a very big opportunity to increase what we call the psychology of learners, to get additional resources within schools that help children cope, particularly with this, because online is now going to be, for lack of a better term, a new normal. Even if they don't do 100%, I'm sure there's going to be a certain larger percentage for which they do online learning. The second one, I think, is an opportunity for an increase in the monitoring and evaluation tools that the ecosystem uses. Many parents used to send their kids to school. Now, those kids, the way they perform, the way they interact, the way the teachers interact with them, and the way they interact with the school system has already changed. So therefore, good tools, it's not enough just to say, okay, well, we have Office 365, but there have to be some monitoring and evaluation tools to check on the progress of these learners as they move in this digital environment.
Let me just add one more, Michael, about the parents. It's also an opportunity for parents, for them to be more involved in the education of their children. Now, primarily because we are locked into the same house, the children are going to school, they are probably receiving lessons from TV or radio or online platforms or cloud. Whichever, parents should be able to help, all right? Homework, clarification of concepts and things like that. But we do know that a large number of parents do not have the capacity to do that. They're not technology savvy to handle, to help their children, or they are not literate in English or in French in the other countries around here. But because of this, we are now looking at how do we support parents themselves to be able to optimally support their children in their education. So I think that's also an area we'll be looking at to see how we involve parents more and more in the education of their children. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Mushemi, this is over to you. You've been consulting, I'm sure, a lot of schools over this period. They've been adjusting to online learning. Now, prior to the normal school systems, which, if I may call them, were doing social learning within classrooms, we had online courses and online schools before then. Is there a need for schools just to adapt to this current model as opposed to having to struggle to build new models out there? So probably adapt to a model similar to Coursera, Skillshare, Brilliant, as opposed to having to rebuild the whole wheel.
I think what's going to happen is a hybrid situation is going to be formed, and it has to be, because you can't go 100% online, because one of the key things, and I'll be talking like a psychologist here, is that a lot of these children gain a lot of their knowledge from what you'd call interactions, and they have to meet with each other and understand and also grow from there. So if you take that away, you're actually removing a very specific aspect and a very positive aspect of a child's growth. So I think both of them will need to be there, but there's no doubt that I think there's going to be a higher leaning towards digital learning. Now, the other thing that is also going to limit it, and why I also say hybrid, is because we also have to look at the lowest common denominator in our societies. Those who have challenges learning, those who have disabilities, those who come from very extreme, extreme poverty, or who have no access, and those people require to be meeting. So we need to design new technologies or new ways in which we can deliver knowledge without actually denying them the education that they need online.
Thank you. So there's one other question here from Ezekiel. What are our alternatives in terms of power and equipment, establishing centers where those who do not have access to and can be given access to these centers for studies. In addition, continuous assessment programs can enable kids to catch up even if they break due to pandemics, as they should progress from where they have stopped.
Continuous assessment is taking place in some countries. Other countries still emphasize examinations, which as UNESCO, we would rather steer governments away from examinations, annual examinations every year, to continuous assessment right through the program. So this is important. Now, for the equipment and centers that the Mwangi Ezekiel mentioned, I think this seems to relate to offline resources, offline solutions, or intranet solution, if you like, which we are talking about and trying to engage Huawei, at least through Lin, to see how we, Lintuo, to see how we expand, develop this, a network of hubs where learners can go and learn from, and then maybe do some wireless bridging to another center where the material can be transmitted across to that center as well. So this is something that is exercising our brains at the moment. We are discussing and seeing how this can be done. It will be a mix of low technology as well as high tech, if you like, but the idea would be to have hubs or centers, all right, we call them resource centers / hubs, where learners can access materials, teachers can access materials, and so on, which may not necessarily be linked to the internet infrastructure completely. Yeah, so that's an opportunity that we'll be looking at and see how this could be developed. Over to you.
All right, Adam, if you could just say something in respect to just offering education for those who have special needs.
Yeah, just briefly, one deaf student in the previous class in Bomet County. There's a video on our website. We really want to do more, and it's been our key focus. Actually, been planning to go to some refugee camps with UNHCR and making sure we go to northern Kenya, but also working more with the disabled groups as well. So I fully agree, it's a huge issue. I think it will be an increasing issue as well. I hear even with COVID, when students do go back to school because of the difficulty with physical contact, those who need special attention and special needs will find it even harder. So we do have to pay attention to that.
So I believe we've come to the end of this session. I'd like to invite Laura back in. Laura?
Thank you, Michael, for moderating the session. Thank you to our speakers. I think the content was fantastic. So I was sitting here as a diligent student, doing my successful online learning and taking my notes. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of the session we've had today, at least from a personal perspective. So Mushemi, from your content, what I got is the most important thing that we keep forgetting is the children. Okay, we need to think about their health, and we need to think about their psychological well-being. We need to think about their setup at home. Maybe school, or when we send our children to school, or the school environment is like a break for them from all sorts of challenges they're going through at home. So we need to create the right atmosphere for them to be able to absorb the information and learn successfully online. And Saidu, I think you also said something around parents have to be more involved in their children's education. We had reached a point where we had handed this over to the teachers, and felt like because we're paying fees, it's their job, let them do their job. We're learning very hard lessons right now and appreciating teachers. Adam, from your presentation, some very exciting stuff. I like the fact that I don't know how else to put it, but sort of like flattening the curve around education, making it accessible for everybody. And you broke it down and talked about you have programs for professionals, for students, for the youth, for consumers. That means, it's all inclusive. And then, and you talked about creating an enabling environment, where you're subsidizing connectivity cost, where you have the digital that is accessing everywhere. And I thought that was very exciting. Saidu, I was very happy to hear that there's actually a partnership discussion going on like a private public partnership between governments, between the UN, between technology partners, and there is no other way we can find a permanent solution for our current situation, of which you also mentioned, we don't know when it's going away. We are seeing a second wave now, so we need to find permanent solutions. This is not, you know, a quick thing where, you know, I always say that sometimes you take a Panadol and your headache goes away. No, this is a problem that that needs to be fixed and needs to be fixed long term. And as Mushemi said, it's going to be the new norm. You know, the online learning and the online living. And you mentioned that governments have to adapt and be more dynamic in how they push out educational programs to their people, and not only talking about governments. I'm also talking about some of the organizations that are represented in the session today. We have to think out of the box. We have to be dynamic. We have to keep upskilling our people. We need to keep creating learning environments in the online space. So on behalf of CIO East Africa, thank you so much for your great content. Thank you so much for the attendees we have online. We hope you found the session exciting. Thank you for being engaging. If you have any further questions, we are going to send you feedback forms. Please do reach out to us. Put your comments in the feedback forms. If you'd like to speak to any of the speakers further, because maybe some of you didn't get the opportunity to have your questions answered, or you didn't get the opportunity to ask your questions, please feel free to indicate that in the feedback form, and then we will connect you to any of our speakers. Wishing you a great evening. Looking forward to having you in our next session next week, Tuesday. We're going to repeat our session on the 5G, and we hope most of you can join us. Have a good afternoon and take care of yourselves and keep safe. Thank you.